In the pristine ballroom of Southern Methodist University, a struggling young woman was about to witness her ultimate humiliation. What started as a graduation celebration took a shocking turn when she came face to face with her brother's public cruelty. Sarah Mitchell wasn't your typical family disappointment. For 24 years, she had spent her life watching from the sidelines, known for her quiet determination and unshakable loyalty to family. When she encountered Jake's deliberate verbal assault during his triumph speech, she had no idea she was walking into a moment that would define her entire future. Sarah's response that night would lead to a 5-year campaign of systematic destruction. What began as wounded pride would become cold, calculated revenge. The Dallas business community would never be the same after Sarah's methodical dismantling of everything her brother had built. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Sarah Mitchell clutched the small wrapped box against her chest as she navigated through the crowd of well-dressed families gathering on the pristine campus of Southern Methodist University. The May heat made her thrift store blazer stick uncomfortably to her skin, but she'd scraped together every dollar she had for this outfit, and for the gift burning a hole in her purse. A vintage fountain pen she'd found at an estate sale, engraved with "Success is earned, not given." She'd thought Jake would appreciate the irony. The graduation ceremony had been everything she'd expected: pomp, circumstance, and her parents beaming with pride as their golden child crossed the stage. Tommy Mitchell had actually teared up when Jake's name was called, his calloused hands clapping harder than anyone else's. Linda had nudged every person within reach, whispering, "That's my son," with the fierce satisfaction of a woman whose dreams were finally coming true. Sarah had clapped too, genuinely proud despite the familiar ache of being invisible. She'd always known Jake was destined for this kind of success. The MBA from a prestigious program, the job offers from consulting firms, the life their parents had always envisioned. What she hadn't expected was how small it would make her feel, sitting in that auditorium in her borrowed dress, watching her brother claim everything she'd never even been encouraged to want. The reception was held in the university's grand ballroom, all crystal chandeliers and marble floors that clicked under the heels of Jake's business school classmates. Sarah had found a quiet corner near the dessert table, nursing a glass of cheap wine and watching her family work the room. Her parents moved with an unfamiliar confidence, Tommy's usual quiet demeanor replaced by the proud chest-puffing of a man whose son had made it. Linda glowed as she introduced herself to other parents, dropping Jake's job offer from Sterling Consulting Group into every conversation. Jake himself was in his element, surrounded by admirers and future colleagues. At 26, he still carried himself with the easy confidence of the high school quarterback he'd once been, his smile practiced and his handshake firm. Sarah watched him navigate the social dynamics with the same strategic thinking that had made him captain of everything he'd ever touched. Marcus Rodriguez appeared at her elbow, a steadying presence in his carefully pressed dress uniform. The former military finance officer had become her closest friend over the past year, ever since she'd helped him navigate the bureaucratic nightmare of starting his veteran support nonprofit. He was one of the few people who saw her potential rather than her failures. "You look like you're planning someone's demise," he said quietly, his dark eyes scanning the room with the same tactical awareness that had served him in Afghanistan. "Just taking it all in," Sarah replied, though her fingers were white-knuckled around her wineglass. The Mitchell family success story, complete with grateful parents and promising future. Marcus studied her face with the careful attention of someone trained to read people. "You know your successes count too, right? That nonprofit software you built for us saved 3 organizations from bankruptcy." Sarah's laugh held no humor. "Try explaining that to them. According to my parents, I'm the daughter who couldn't even finish college, while Jake's the son who has his whole life figured out." Before Marcus could respond, Jake's voice boomed across the ballroom. He'd climbed onto a small platform. Near the bar, champagne flute raised, commanding attention with the natural authority Sarah had always envied. The room quieted, faces turning toward the golden child ready to make his victory speech. "Ladies and gentlemen, family and friends," Jake began, his voice carrying the practiced cadence of someone used to being listened to. "This day represents more than just an achievement. It represents the power of vision, hard work, and refusing to settle for mediocrity. Sarah felt something cold settle in her stomach as Jake's eyes found hers across the room. There was something in his expression she didn't recognize, a cruelty that seemed amplified by success and champagne. "I've learned that in life, there are two kinds of people," Jake continued, his smile sharp. "Those who dream big and make it happen, and those who make excuses and stay exactly where they are." His gaze lingered on Sarah, and she felt the attention of the room shifting, following his line of sight. Some people will always be poor, not just financially, but in spirit, in ambition, in their willingness to do what it takes to succeed. The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. Around her, she could feel the subtle shift as people began to understand who Jake was talking about. Her parents stood frozen near the front of the crowd, their pride now mixed with embarrassment. Linda's face had gone pale, while Tommy looked between his children with the helpless expression of a man who'd never learned how to navigate emotional landmines. "Now, I'm not saying it's anyone's fault," Jake pressed on, his voice carrying across the silent room. "Some people just aren't built for success. They'd rather blame the system, or their circumstances, or anyone but themselves for where they end up." He raised his glass higher. "So here's to those of us who refuse to accept limitations, and to those who've taught us, through their example, exactly what not to become." The applause that followed was uncomfortable, scattered. People unsure whether they'd witnessed triumph or cruelty. Sarah stood frozen in her corner, feeling the weight of hundreds of eyes on her. The gift box in her hands seemed to mock her. Now, success is earned, not given, as if her brother's public humiliation was somehow deserved. Marcus's hand found her shoulder, his voice low and urgent. "Sarah, let's go." But she couldn't move, couldn't breathe. The room seemed to tilt around her as the full scope of Jake's calculated cruelty sank in. This wasn't a spontaneous moment of drunken meanness. This was deliberate. He'd planned this, orchestrated this public humiliation on the day of his greatest triumph, using her as a prop in his success story. Her parents finally moved, Linda hurrying toward her with tears in her eyes, Tommy following with his shoulders hunched in shame. But Sarah was already pushing through the crowd, Marcus close, behind her, the wrapped gift forgotten on a nearby table. She made it to the parking lot before the tears came, great heaving sobs that she pressed into her hands as she leaned against her beat-up Honda Civic. The car was 12 years old, held together with hope and duct tape, and it had never felt more like a symbol of everything she wasn't. "Sarah." Marcus's voice was gentle but firm. "Look at me." She raised her head, mascara streaking down her cheeks, and saw something in his expression that surprised her. Not pity, but recognition, the look of one warrior acknowledging another. "You know what that was in there?" he said quietly. "That was fear. Your brother just told a room full of people exactly what kind of man he really is, and the only reason he did it was because he's terrified you might actually prove him wrong." Sarah wiped her face with the back of her hand, feeling something shift inside her chest. The hurt was still there, raw and burning, but underneath it was something colder, something harder. "He thinks I'll always be poor," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Yeah, he does," Marcus replied. "Question is, what are you going to do about it?" Sarah looked back at the ballroom, its windows glowing with warm light and the sound of celebration. Inside, her brother was probably receiving congratulations for his speech, her parents making quiet apologies for their difficult daughter, the whole family narrative resetting itself around Jake's version of success. She thought about the fountain pen she'd bought him, still sitting on that table. Success is earned, not given. Maybe Jake was right about that part. Maybe success was something you had to take, something you had to prove, something you had to build with your own hands until it was so undeniable that no one could ever question it again. "I'm going to destroy him," she said quietly, the words coming out with surprising clarity. "I'm going to build something so big, so successful that everyone in that room will remember this moment and know exactly how wrong he was." Marcus studied, her face in the parking lot lights, seeing something there that made him nod slowly. "And then what?" Sarah's smile was sharp as glass. "Then I'm going to buy whatever company he works for and make sure he knows it was me." She got into her car, started the engine that coughed and wheezed, but ultimately turned over and drove away from her brother's triumph. In the rearview mirror, she could see the ballroom windows growing smaller, but the burn of humiliation in her chest only grew stronger. Marcus watched her taillights disappear into the Dallas night, a cold certainty settling in his gut. He'd seen that look before, in soldiers who'd been pushed past their breaking point. The question wasn't whether Sarah would keep her promise. It was whether she'd still be the same person when she finally got her revenge. Marcus's hand tightened on the steering wheel as he pulled into the parking garage of Mitchell Financial Technologies, the sleek glass tower that had risen from Sarah's ashes like some corporate phoenix. 5 years had passed since that night, in the SMU parking lot, and the transformation was complete, both in the company and in the woman who'd built it. The elevator whisked him to the 32nd floor, where floor-to-ceiling windows offered a commanding view of Dallas's skyline. Sarah's corner office sat behind glass walls that gave her a clear sightline to every desk, every conversation, every moment of her empire's daily operations. She stood with her back to the door, studying something on her laptop screen with the focused intensity that had become her trademark. The Meridian Industries contract came through, Marcus announced as he entered, dropping a thick folder on her mahogany desk. $43 million over 3 years. That puts us in the top tier of fintech providers in Texas. Sarah turned, and Marcus still felt that familiar jolt at seeing what she'd become. Gone was the vulnerable young woman from the graduation reception. In her place stood a CEO whose tailored suits cost more than most people's cars, whose smile had been weaponized into a tool of negotiation, whose gray eyes could calculate profit margins while simultaneously planning someone's professional destruction. Meridian was Sterling Consulting's client until last month, Sarah said, her voice carrying satisfaction like a fine wine. Robert Sterling must be wondering how he lost such a lucrative account to a small Dallas startup. Marcus settled into the chair across from her desk, noting the wall behind her, a carefully curated display of awards, newspaper clippings, and photos with tech industry leaders. No family pictures, no personal touches, just the monuments to a success story written in other people's defeats. "You've been targeting Sterling's clients for 3 years," he said carefully. "Don't you think it's time to focus on growing our own business instead of systematically dismantling someone else's?" Sarah's laugh held no warmth. "Our business is growing, Marcus. We've increased revenue by 400% since our first year. Our client retention rate is 97%. Our employee satisfaction scores are through the roof." She gestured toward the bustling office beyond her glass walls. "Everyone here is making more money than they've ever dreamed of. That's not what I meant, and you know it." She moved to her desk, pulling up a file that Marcus recognized with a sinking heart, her research on Sterling Consulting Group. The folder was thick enough to choke a horse, filled with financial reports, employee records, client analyses, and strategic assessments. Sarah had studied her target with the dedication of a general planning a siege. "Jake's doing well there," she said conversationally, scrolling through what looked like internal performance reviews. "Senior associate now. Specializes in corporate restructuring. He's got a reputation for being aggressive in his cost-cutting recommendations." "How did you even get access to Sterling's internal documents?" Sarah's smile was sharp. "I have my sources." Marcus felt something cold settle in his stomach. "Please tell me you're not paying someone to spy on your brother's company." "Nothing so dramatic. I've been dating someone who works there. Tyler Brooks. Senior consultant, very ethical. Completely unaware that his girlfriend is using him for corporate intelligence." Her tone was matter-of-fact, as if she were discussing the weather. "Jesus, Sarah." Marcus leaned back in his chair, studying the woman he'd thought he knew. "Do you hear yourself right now? You're using an innocent man to get revenge on your brother." "Tyler's not innocent. He's naive. There's a difference." Sarah closed the laptop and fixed Marcus with a stare that could have frozen Dallas in August. "And he's getting something out of the relationship too. Great sex, expensive dinners, access to tech industry connections that will advance his career. Everyone wins. Everyone except Tyler, who has no idea he's being manipulated." Sarah's expression flickered, just for a moment, with something that might have been guilt. But it was gone so quickly, Marcus almost thought he'd imagined it. "You used to believe in what we were building," she said, deflecting. "Remember that First year? Working 18-hour days in that cramped office above the Korean restaurant? You said we were going to prove that business could be done with honor. We were. But somewhere along the way, you turned it into a weapon. Sarah stood abruptly, moving to the window that offered a view of downtown Dallas. Somewhere out there, Jake was probably sitting in Sterling's offices, unaware that his sister had spent 5 years systematically dismantling everything he thought he'd built. He destroyed me in front of everyone who mattered, she said quietly. Our parents, his classmates, future business contacts. He made sure everyone in that room knew exactly what he thought of me. So you're going to do the same to him? I'm going to do worse. Sarah's reflection in the glass looked like a stranger, beautiful, successful, and utterly cold. I'm going to take everything he thinks he's earned and show him how easily it can disappear. Marcus stood, recognizing the dismissal in her tone. At the door, he paused, looking back at the woman who'd once helped him build a nonprofit to support struggling veterans. The Sarah I met 5 years ago would be horrified by what you've become. The Sarah from 5 years ago was weak, she replied without turning around. She let people walk all over her and called it humility. This Sarah gets results. Marcus left her standing at that window, silhouetted against the Dallas skyline like some corporate predator surveying her territory. As the elevator descended, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was watching his closest friend disappear into someone he didn't recognize. Someone who might be too far gone to save. Meanwhile, 32 floors above, Sarah pulled out her phone and scrolled to Tyler's contact. They had dinner plans that evening, and she needed to find out more about Sterling's Q4 financial projections. The fact that she was genuinely looking forward to seeing him was a complication she'd deal with later. Success, she'd learned, required sacrifice. The question was whether she'd have anything left of herself when the war was finally won. Sarah stared at her phone for a long moment after Marcus left, Tyler's contact information glowing on the screen. The irony wasn't lost on her. She'd started dating him for information, but somewhere in the past 8 months, the lines had blurred, in ways she hadn't anticipated. That evening, Tyler arrived at her penthouse apartment with takeout from their favorite Thai place, and a smile that still made her chest tighten unexpectedly. He moved through her space with easy familiarity, setting containers on the granite counter while she poured wine. At 31, he carried himself with the quiet confidence of someone who'd earned everything through merit rather than manipulation. "Rough day?" he asked, noting the tension in her shoulders as she uncorked a bottle of Cabernet. "Just the usual corporate warfare," Sarah replied, settling beside him on the couch. "You know how it is. Eat or be eaten in the business world." Tyler's expression grew thoughtful as he served the pad thai. "Speaking of corporate warfare, we had an interesting situation at Sterling today. Jake Mitchell. You remember him, right? The senior associate I mentioned?" Sarah's pulse quickened, but her voice remained steady. "The one with the ethics issues? That's putting it mildly." Tyler shook his head, genuine concern creasing his features. "Robert Sterling called him into the office today. Apparently, there are questions about some client billing discrepancies. Nothing proven yet, but the whispers are getting louder." Sarah took a sip of wine, processing this information. Jake's corner cutting had finally started catching up with him. The thought should have brought her satisfaction, but Tyler's obvious discomfort complicated her reaction. "What kind of discrepancies?" she asked, knowing she was walking a dangerous line. "Inflated hours, questionable expense reports, maybe some creative interpretation of project scope." Tyler ran a hand through his hair, a gesture Sarah had learned meant he was genuinely troubled. "The worst part is, he's been mentoring some of the junior associates. If this goes sideways, it could hurt people who don't deserve it." "People? Like you?" "Maybe. I've worked on 3 projects with him this year. If there's an investigation." Tyler trailed off, staring at his food. "I've worked too hard to get where I am to have it destroyed by someone else's shortcuts." Sarah reached over and took his hand, surprised by the genuine comfort she wanted to offer. This was the complication she'd been avoiding. Tyler wasn't just a source of information anymore. He was a good man caught in the crossfire of her revenge plot. "You're not responsible for his choices," she said softly. "Your work speaks for itself." Tyler's smile was grateful but strained. "I keep telling myself that, but you know how it is in consulting. Guilt by association can be just as damaging as actual guilt. They ate in comfortable silence for a while, Sarah's mind racing through the implications. Jake's professional troubles were accelerating faster than she'd anticipated. Part of her felt vindicated. This was karma, not her manipulation. But another part, the part that was falling for Tyler despite herself, felt sick at the thought of collateral damage. "There's something else," Tyler said eventually, his voice careful. "We lost another major client today. Meridian Industries. They signed with some fintech company instead of renewing with us." Sarah's heart stopped. "Which company?" "Mitchell Financial Technologies. Ever heard of them?" The name hung between them like a loaded weapon. Sarah forced herself to take another bite of food, buying time while her mind scrambled. "Sounds familiar. Local company?" "Dallas-based, yeah. They've been aggressive in going after our client base lately. Robert's getting paranoid about corporate espionage." Tyler's laugh was humorless. "Not that he's wrong to be worried. Someone's definitely targeting us specifically. Maybe they're just good at what they do. Maybe." Tyler studied her face with the intensity that had first attracted her. To him, "It's just weird timing, you know? 3 major clients in 6 months, all jumping ship to the same competitor. Makes you wonder if someone's working from inside information." Sarah felt sweat gathering at the base of her neck despite the air conditioning. That would be illegal. Illegal, immoral, and probably happening anyway. Tyler leaned back against the couch cushions, his expression troubled. "The business world isn't as clean as I thought it would be when I was growing up in Tennessee." The reference to his childhood hit Sarah unexpectedly. She'd learned about his background over months of careful questioning. The first-generation college student who'd worked 3 jobs to pay for school, who'd never had anything handed to him, who believed in earning success through honest work. Everything Jake pretended to be but wasn't. "You're one of the good ones," she said, meaning it more than she'd intended. Tyler's eyes softened as he reached over to brush a strand of hair from her face. "So are you." The lie sat between them, like poison. Sarah leaned into his touch anyway, desperate for a moment of authentic connection, even as she planned his company's destruction. When he kissed her, she kissed him back with the fervor of someone trying to hold on to something pure, in the middle of her own corruption. Later, as Tyler slept beside her, Sarah stared at the ceiling and counted the cost of her revenge. Every piece of information Tyler shared brought her closer to destroying Jake's career. But every moment of genuine affection between them made her more aware of what she was sacrificing for that destruction. She thought about Marcus's words. The Sarah from 5 years ago would be horrified, but that Sarah had been humiliated in front of everyone who mattered. This Sarah was building an empire on the bones of her brother's arrogance. The question was whether Tyler would still look at her the same way when he discovered who she really was. The morning sun cast long shadows across Sterling Consulting Group's 42nd floor, as Jake Mitchell adjusted his Italian silk tie and prepared for what he assumed would be another routine performance review. He'd been Robert Sterling's golden boy for 3 years running, the associate who brought in clients, exceeded billable hour targets, and made the firm money. Whatever minor questions had been raised about his methods, Jake was confident his results would speak for themselves. Robert Sterling's corner office commanded a view of downtown Dallas that Jake had always coveted. At 62, Sterling had built his consulting empire through a combination of shrewd business instincts and an unwavering commitment to ethical practices that had earned him respect throughout the industry. His silver hair and weathered face gave him the appearance of a man who'd seen every corporate game played and won most of them honestly. "Jake, sit down." Sterling's voice carried none of its usual warmth as he gestured to the chair across from his massive oak desk. Between them lay a folder thick enough to represent either Jake's promotion or his destruction. "Morning, Robert. Beautiful day, isn't it?" Jake's smile was practiced, confident. "I saw the preliminary Q3 numbers. The Hartwell Industries project came in ahead of schedule and under budget. I think we can safely say, we need to talk about your billing practices." The words hit Jake like cold water. His smile faltered for just a moment before reasserting itself. "My billing? Robert, I'm one of your top revenue generators. Every Our I-bill is documented, every expense justified. Are they? Sterling opened the folder, revealing a stack of documents that made Jake's stomach lurch. Client timesheets, expense reports, project budgets, all marked with red ink and yellow highlighters. Because according to this audit, you've been inflating your billable hours by an average of 20% over the past 18 months. Jake's throat felt dry, but he maintained his composure. That's impossible. There must be some mistake in the calculations. Mrs. Patterson from Meridian Industries called me personally last week. Sterling's voice was deadly quiet. She wanted to know why their project budget had increased by 40% without authorization. When I looked into it, I found you'd been billing strategy sessions that never happened, research that was never conducted, and meetings that existed only on your timesheet. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The room seemed to tilt around Jake as he processed the implications. Meridian Industries, the client they'd just lost to that upstart fintech company. The timing couldn't be coincidental. Robert, let me explain. Explain this. Sterling slid a photocopied receipt across the desk. A $5,000 dinner at the French Room, billed to the Hartwell account as a client development expense. Except the Hartwell executives were in Tokyo that week, and according to the restaurant's records, you were dining with 3 friends and your wife. Jake stared at the receipt, his mind racing through explanations, justifications, anything that might salvage the situation. That was a networking dinner. Potential clients. Jake. Sterling's voice cut through the desperate explanation like a blade. I've been in this business for 30 years. I've seen every variation of creative billing, every excuse, every justification. What I haven't seen is someone with your talent throw it all away for such petty theft. The word theft hung in the air between them like an accusation Jake couldn't escape. His carefully constructed facade was crumbling, revealing the insecurity and entitlement that had always lurked beneath his polished exterior. You don't understand the pressure I'm under, Jake said, his voice losing its practiced smoothness. Ashley's pregnant. We just bought the house in Highland Park. The mortgage alone is $8,000 a month according to your loan application. Sterling pulled out another document, which is interesting, because you told me it was 12 when you requested that salary advance last year. Jake felt sweat gathering at his collar despite the office's air conditioning. Every lie, every shortcut, every corner he'd cut was laid bare in that folder. Years of careful deception unraveling in the span of a conversation. I've built this company's reputation on integrity, Sterling continued, his disappointment more devastating than anger would have been. Every client who works with us trusts that we'll give them honest value for their investment. You've violated that trust, and in doing so, you've damaged something that took me decades to build. Robert, please, I can fix this. I'll pay back every penny. I'll work double hours. You'll clean out your office. Sterling closed the folder with finality. Security will escort you out. Your final paycheck will be adjusted to reflect the discrepancies we've discovered. You should consider yourself fortunate that we're not pursuing criminal charges. Jake sat in stunned silence as the reality sank in. His career, his reputation, his future, all of it destroyed in the span of 20 minutes. The golden child, who'd never failed at anything, was being cast out in disgrace. This is because of Meridian, isn't it? Jake's voice was barely a whisper. Someone's targeting the firm using my mistakes as ammunition. Your mistakes are your own, Jake. Don't cheapen them by blaming external forces. Sterling pressed his intercom button. Send security to my office, please. As Jake walked through Sterling's offices for the last time, past colleagues who averted their eyes and assistants who whispered behind their hands, he felt the weight of his father's disappointment, his mother's broken dreams, and his wife's impending questions. The golden child had finally tarnished beyond repair. But in the back of his mind, a suspicion was growing. Someone had been systematically dismantling his life, and he was beginning to suspect exactly who that someone might be. The question was whether he could prove it before his world collapsed completely. The elevator doors closed on Jake Mitchell's career, but they opened on something far more dangerous, a man with nothing left to lose and a growing certainty that his destruction hadn't been accidental. Robert Sterling stood at his office window, watching the Dallas skyline shimmer in the afternoon heat when his assistant announced the arrival of Sarah Mitchell. The name had appeared on his calendar 3 days ago, accompanied by a brief note about strategic partnership opportunities. What Sterling hadn't expected was the poised woman who walked into his office with the confidence of someone who owned the world. "Mr. Sterling, thank you for seeing me on such short notice." Sarah's handshake was firm, her gray suit impeccable, her smile calculated to convey respect while maintaining authority. "I'm Sarah Mitchell, CEO of Mitchell Financial Technologies." Sterling studied her with the practiced eye of someone who'd built his fortune reading people. There was something familiar about her bearing, an intensity that reminded him of ambitious young executives he'd mentored over the years. But there was something else, a coldness that suggested this meeting was about more than business. "Ms. Mitchell, your company has been making quite an impression in the fintech space." Sterling gestured toward the conference table. "Though I have to say, some of your client acquisition strategies have been aggressive." Sarah's smile didn't waver as she settled into her chair, placing a leather portfolio on the table between them. "Competition drives innovation, Mr. Sterling. I'm sure you understand that better than most." "Indeed, though I prefer competition that relies on superior service rather than inside information." The accusation hung in the air like smoke. Sarah met Sterling's gaze steadily, her expression giving nothing away. "I'm not sure what you're implying." "I'm implying that losing 3 major clients to the same competitor in 6 months suggests either remarkable coincidence or remarkable intelligence gathering." Sterling leaned back in his chair. "Which brings me to wonder why the CEO of that competitor is sitting in my office today." Sarah opened her portfolio, revealing documents that made Sterling's eyebrows rise. Financial projections, market analyses, acquisition proposals, all bearing the Mitchell Financial Technologies letterhead. "I'm here to make you an offer, Mr. Sterling. Mitchell Financial Technologies would like to acquire Sterling Consulting Group." The boldness of it took Sterling's breath away. In his 30 years of business, he'd faced aggressive competitors, hostile takeovers, and corporate raiders. But he'd never had someone walk into his office and calmly announce their intention to buy his life's work. "I'm afraid Sterling isn't for sale, Ms. Mitchell. Everything's for sale at the right price." Sarah slid a document across the table. $42 million. Cash offer. No financing contingencies, no regulatory delays. You could close within 60 days and walk away with enough money to retire anywhere in the world. Sterling glanced at the figure but didn't touch the document. "And why would I want to do that?" "Because your company is hemorrhaging clients. Your reputation is suffering from the Jake Mitchell scandal, and you're facing increased competition from firms that understand modern financial technology." Sarah's voice remained conversational, but her words cut like surgical instruments. "I'm offering you a graceful exit before things get worse. The Jake Mitchell situation has been resolved. One bad employee doesn't define. One bad employee who mentored half your junior staff, whose projects are now under client scrutiny, whose billing practices have called your entire quality control system into question." Sarah leaned forward, slightly. "How many other clients are reviewing their relationships with Sterling right now? How many are wondering what else might be wrong with your operation?" Sterling felt a chill that had nothing to do with the office air conditioning. Every point she made was accurate. Every concern she raised was keeping him awake at night. The Jake Mitchell termination had been necessary, but the collateral damage was still unfolding. "You've done your homework," he said carefully. "I make it my business to understand my acquisitions thoroughly." Sarah's smile was sharp, including the family dynamics that sometimes complicate business relationships. Something in her tone made Sterling look at her more closely. The familiar intensity, the calculated cruelty, the particular way she'd emphasized Jake Mitchell's name throughout their conversation. "Mitchell," he said slowly. "Sarah Mitchell. You're related to Jake." "My brother." The admission came with no emotion, as if she were discussing the weather. "Though family loyalty has never been our strong suit." The pieces clicked into place with devastating clarity. The targeted client theft, the perfectly timed acquisition offer, the intimate knowledge of Sterling's vulnerabilities, all of it orchestrated by Jake's own sister. "This isn't about business," Sterling said. "This is about revenge." This is about justice, Sarah corrected. Jake spent years building his career on lies and shortcuts. I'm simply ensuring there are consequences for that behavior. And you're willing to destroy an entire company to get revenge on one man? Sarah's expression finally showed emotion, a flash of something raw and dangerous. He destroyed me in front of everyone who mattered. Turnabout seems fair. Sterling stood, moving to his window again. Below, Dallas bustled with the energy of ambition and competition. Somewhere in that maze of glass and steel, Tyler Brooks was probably working late, unaware that his girlfriend was attempting to buy his employer. "You're using Tyler Brooks," Sterling said without turning around. "Good man. Honest. Doesn't deserve to be collateral damage in your family war." Sarah's composure flickered. "Tyler will be fine. We'll have a place for talented consultants at Mitchell Financial. Will you tell him who you really are before or after you destroy his career?" The question hit its mark. Sarah's jaw tightened, but she recovered quickly. "You have 72 hours to consider my offer, Mr. Sterling. After that, I'll be forced to pursue more aggressive acquisition strategies." Sterling turned back to face her. "And if I refuse?" Sarah's smile was cold as winter steel. "Then you'll discover just how patient I've been in targeting your business so far. What you've seen up to now has been gentle persuasion." She gathered her documents and stood, moving toward the door with the same confidence she'd brought into the room. At the threshold, she paused. "For what it's worth, Mr. Sterling, I respect what you've built here. Under different circumstances, I might have wanted to work with you rather than against you. But these circumstances are exactly what you've created." "No," Sarah said quietly. "These circumstances were created 5 years ago at an MBA graduation ceremony. I'm simply ensuring they reach their logical conclusion." After she left, Sterling remained at his window, watching the sun set over Dallas. He'd built Sterling Consulting on principles of integrity and honest dealing. Now he faced a choice between surrendering his life's work to a woman driven by vengeance, or fighting a war against an enemy who knew every vulnerability he possessed. Either way, he suspected the Sterling Consulting Group he'd spent 30 years building was already gone. Tyler Brooks sat in his cubicle at Sterling Consulting, staring at the computer screen that displayed Sarah Mitchell's corporate biography. The photograph showed the woman he'd been dating for 8 months, but the name beneath it made his world tilt on its axis. Mitchell. The same last name as Jake, the disgraced colleague whose termination had sent shockwaves through the office. His hands trembled as he scrolled through the article about Mitchell Financial Technology's rapid rise in the Dallas market. CEO Sarah Mitchell, 26, had built her company from nothing into a major player in the fintech space. The article mentioned her strategic approach to client acquisition and her deep understanding of the consulting industry's vulnerabilities. Everything made sense now. The perfectly timed questions about Sterling's clients, her unusual interest in office gossip, the way she'd probed for details about company policies and personnel changes. Tyler had chalked it up to professional curiosity from someone in a related field. He'd never suspected he was being systematically mined for information. His phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. "Dinner tonight? I made reservations at that place you love." Tyler stared at the message, rage and heartbreak warring in his chest. How long had she been laughing at him? How many intimate moments had been calculated moves in whatever game she was playing with his employer? He found Robert Sterling in his office, looking older than Tyler had ever seen him. The acquisition offer from Mitchell Financial Technologies sat on his desk like a loaded weapon. "Mr. Sterling, I need to tell you something about Sarah Mitchell." Sterling looked up from the documents, his expression grim. "Let me guess. You've been dating her." Tyler's surprise must have shown on his face, because Sterling's mouth twisted into something that might have been a smile if it held any humor. "Tyler, I've been in business long enough to recognize a long-term intelligence operation when I see one. The question is whether you were complicit or just remarkably naive." "Naive," Tyler said without hesitation. "Jesus, I thought. I thought she cared about me." "Maybe she did. People are complicated, even when they're manipulating us." Sterling gestured to the chair across from his desk. "Tell me everything you told her about this company." The next hour was one of the most humiliating of Tyler's life. Every dinner conversation, Every casual question, every moment of professional confidence shared in bed, all of it had been feeding information to Sterling's newest competitor. Client concerns, internal politics, financial projections, personnel, issues. Tyler had unknowingly provided a roadmap for dismantling the company he'd worked so hard to join. She knew exactly when to make her acquisition offer, Sterling said when Tyler finished his confession. Right after Jake's termination, when we're most vulnerable. Every client she stole, every weakness she exploited, you gave her the intelligence to do it. Tyler buried his face in his hands. I'm sorry. God, I'm so sorry. I'll resign immediately. You'll do no such thing. Sterling's voice was firm. This isn't your fault, Tyler. You were targeted by a professional who spent months earning your trust for exactly this purpose. How can you say it's not my fault? I compromised everything. You fell in love with someone who was using you. That makes you human, not guilty. Sterling leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful. The question now is what we do about it. Tyler raised his head. What do you mean? Ms. Mitchell's acquisition offer assumes we're helpless, that her intelligence advantage is insurmountable. But she made one critical error. She revealed herself to you. For the first time in this entire operation, we know what she's planning before she does it. You want me to spy on her? I want you to be honest with her. Tell her you know who she is. See how she reacts. People make their biggest mistakes when they're forced to defend the indefensible. Tyler's phone buzzed again. Another text from Sarah, this one more urgent. Where are you? Our reservation is in an hour. He showed the message to Sterling, who nodded. Go to dinner, Tyler. Have the conversation you need to have. But remember, whatever feelings were real between you two, she chose to destroy them the moment she decided to use you. An hour later, Tyler sat across from Sarah at their usual table in the restaurant where they'd shared so many seemingly intimate conversations. She looked radiant in the candlelight, her smile warm and genuine as she reached across the table to take his hand. You look tense, she said, her thumb stroking across his knuckles. Rough day at Sterling? You could say that. Tyler pulled his hand back, watching her expression carefully. Though I suppose you already know that. Something flickered. In Sarah's eyes, confusion, then calculation, then the dawning realization that her carefully constructed world was about to collapse. Tyler, what are you talking about? I'm talking about Mitchell Financial Technologies, Sarah. I'm talking about the fact that you're Jake Mitchell's sister. I'm talking about the fact that everything between us has been a lie. The mask slipped completely. For a moment, Tyler saw the vulnerable woman he'd fallen in love with. The one who'd shared stories about growing up overlooked, who'd cried watching movies about families healing their wounds. Then the CEO reasserted herself, cold and calculating. Not everything was a lie. Enough of it was. Tyler's voice was quiet but steady. Did you ever care about me at all? Or was I just a useful source of information? Sarah was quiet for a long moment, staring at her wine glass. When she finally looked up, her eyes held something that might have been regret. I cared about you, more than I expected to, more than I wanted to. But not enough to stop using me. No, she admitted. Not enough for that. Tyler nodded, standing from the table. Then we have nothing else to discuss. Tyler, wait. Sarah stood too, her composure finally cracking. It doesn't have to end like this. Once the acquisition goes through, once this is all over, once you've destroyed everyone I work with, once you've used me to bankrupt the company I've dedicated my career to building. Tyler's laugh was bitter. You really think there's a future for us after that? He walked away, leaving Sarah standing alone in the restaurant, surrounded by the ruins of the only genuine relationship she'd built in 5 years. As the maitre d' approached to ask if everything was all right, Sarah realized that winning, her war against Jake, might cost her everything else that mattered. The taste of victory, she was learning, was surprisingly bitter. The living room of the Mitchell family home hadn't seen all 4 family members together in over 2 years. Linda Mitchell sat rigidly on the floral couch she'd saved 6 months, To buy. Her hands folded tightly in her lap as she watched her children avoid eye contact. Tommy lingered near the kitchen doorway, uncomfortable with the emotional minefield he'd helped create through decades of avoidance. Sarah arrived last, her designer heels clicking against the worn linoleum that had seemed adequate when the family's biggest concern was making ends meet. She'd driven here directly from her office, where Marcus had finally carried out his threat to resign, leaving a letter that accused her of losing her humanity in pursuit of hollow victory. "Thank you for coming," Linda began, her voice carrying the careful formality of someone addressing strangers rather than her children. "We need to talk about what's happening between you two." Jake sat slumped in his father's old recliner, still wearing the rumpled clothes he'd thrown on that morning for another fruitless job interview. His termination from Sterling had spread through Dallas's consulting community like wildfire, making him effectively unemployable in his chosen field. Ashley sat beside him on a kitchen chair, one hand resting protectively on her growing belly, the other gripping Jake's shoulder. "What's to talk about?" Jake's voice was bitter. "My sister systematically destroyed my career as revenge for something I said 5 years ago. Pretty straightforward family dysfunction." "It wasn't just something you said." Sarah's voice was controlled, but tension radiated from her posture. "You humiliated me in front of everyone who mattered. You made sure every person in that room knew exactly how worthless you thought I was." "I was drunk and stupid and 26 years old," Jake shot back. "People say things they don't mean when they're—" "You meant every word." Sarah's gray eyes were chips of ice. "You looked right at me when you said some people would always be poor. You wanted everyone to know you were talking about your failure of a sister." Linda's face crumpled, the weight of her favoritism finally registering in full. "Sarah, honey, we never thought you were a failure. Didn't you?" Sarah turned that icy stare on her mother. "When I dropped out of community college to start my first business, what did you say? When that business failed and I was sleeping on Marcus's couch, eating ramen for every meal, what was your response?" Linda's silence was answer enough. Tommy shifted uncomfortably, remembering his own words. "Maybe you should find something more stable, sweetheart. Something with benefits." "You told me to get a real job," Sarah continued. "You said entrepreneurship was for people who had family money to fall back on. You made it clear that Jake's path was the only acceptable definition of success in this family. Because we were scared for you." Tommy finally spoke, his voice rough with emotion. "We came from nothing, Sarah. Your mother and I, we worked ourselves to the bone so you kids could have better lives. Jake's path seemed safer." "Safer for who?" Sarah's composure cracked slightly. "Do you have any idea what it felt like? To watch you beam with pride every time Jake got a promotion while treating my achievements like cute hobbies." Ashley spoke for the first time, her southern accent thickened by pregnancy hormones and stress. "Sarah, I understand you're hurt, but what you've done to Jake, it's affecting more than just him." Her hand moved protectively over her belly. "The stress has been causing complications. I've been in the hospital twice this month." The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. She looked at Ashley, really looked, and saw the exhaustion, the worry lines that hadn't been there 6 months ago, the way she unconsciously braced herself as if expecting another crisis. "I didn't know," Sarah said quietly. "Because you didn't ask." Jake's voice was raw. "You've been so focused on destroying me that you never considered who else might get hurt." Sarah stood abruptly, moving to the window that overlooked the small backyard where she and Jake had played as children. Before the disappointments and comparisons and crushing weight of parental expectations had poisoned everything between them. "I built an empire," she said to the glass. 43 million in annual revenue. 57 employees who depend on me for their livelihoods. I proved that everything you thought about my potential was wrong. And what good has it done you?" Linda's voice was barely a whisper. "You're successful and miserable and alone. You've driven away everyone who cared about you." "I'm not alone by choice." Sarah turned back to face them. "I'm alone because every relationship I've tried to build has been poisoned by the need to prove myself worthy of basic respect from my own family." The room fell silent, except for the tick of the wall clock that had marked time through decades of Mitchell family dysfunction. Tommy cleared his throat, the sound unnaturally loud in the quiet. I failed you both, he said finally. I was so busy working, so afraid of saying the wrong thing, that I never learned how to talk to my own children. I let your mother carry all the emotional weight, and she made choices based on fear instead of love. Linda was crying now, quiet tears that spoke to years of suppressed guilt. I wanted so badly for you both to succeed that I forgot to love you for who you were instead of what you achieved. Sarah felt something shift in her chest, a crack in the armor she'd built around her heart. But before she could respond, her phone buzzed with an urgent message from her legal team. The Sterling acquisition was moving to final negotiations. In 72 hours, she would own her brother's former employer. The moment of potential reconciliation shattered as Sarah looked at the message, then at her family's expectant faces. She had a choice to make: continue down the path of revenge that had consumed 5 years of her life, or find some way to break the cycle of hurt that had poisoned 3 generations of Mitchells. But standing in this room, surrounded by the wreckage of relationships she'd spent her whole life craving, Sarah wasn't sure she remembered how to choose anything but vengeance. Robert Sterling's office felt different at midnight, stripped of its daytime authority and reduced to shadows cast by the Dallas skyline. Sarah had requested this meeting at an unusual hour, claiming urgent developments in the acquisition timeline. Sterling suspected she simply preferred operating in darkness. It suited the nature of their business. You look tired, Ms. Mitchell, Sterling observed as Sarah settled into the chair across from his desk. She did look different, her usual armor of perfect composure showing hairline cracks that suggested the family confrontation had taken its toll. It's been a complicated week, Sarah admitted. I assume you've heard about Tyler's resignation? Tyler didn't resign. I gave him a leave of absence to sort through his feelings about this situation. Sterling's voice was measured. He's a good man who made the mistake of falling for someone who was using him. Sarah flinched but didn't respond to the accusation. Instead, she placed a revised contract on Sterling's desk. I'm prepared to increase my offer. $48 million with a retention bonus for key personnel. Your people would be protected. Including Tyler? Especially Tyler. Sterling studied the document without touching it. And what about Jake? What happens to him in your grand design? Jake made his own choices. He's facing the consequences of his own actions, not mine. Is he? Sterling leaned back in his chair. Because from where I sit, it looks like you orchestrated his downfall just as carefully as you orchestrated everything else. Sarah's jaw tightened. I didn't force him to falsify billing records or inflate expenses. I didn't make him cut ethical corners for 3 years. All I did was ensure there were consequences for behavior that should never have been tolerated. And the collateral damage? Ashley's pregnancy complications? Tyler's career? The other employees who'll lose their jobs when I retire instead of selling? What do you mean, retire? Sterling's smile held no warmth. I've decided not to sell to you, Ms. Mitchell. Instead, I'm shutting down Sterling Consulting Group. I'd rather see 30 years of work disappear than hand it over to someone who views human beings as acceptable casualties in a family war. The blood drained from Sarah's face. You can't do that. Think about your employees, your clients. I am thinking about them. I'm thinking they deserve better than working for someone who spent 8 months manipulating a good man's feelings to gather corporate intelligence. Sterling stood, moving to his window. I'm thinking my clients deserve consultants who solve problems instead of creating them. Sarah felt panic rising in her chest. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. She was supposed to win, to achieve the perfect revenge that would finally heal the wound Jake had inflicted 5 years ago. What do you want? She asked quietly. I want you to remember that revenge is a poison you drink, hoping someone else will die. Sterling turned back to face her. I want you to consider whether destroying Jake will actually make you feel better, or whether it will just create new wounds that never heal. Before Sarah could respond, her phone rang. Ashley's name appeared on the screen, and Sarah's blood turned to ice water. Ashley wouldn't call unless something was seriously wrong. I have to take this, Sarah said, answering the call. Sarah? Ashley's voice was strained, frightened. I'm at Presbyterian Hospital. Something's wrong with the baby. Jake's with me. But... Her voice broke. The doctors say the stress might have caused placental complications. They're talking about emergency surgery. Sarah closed her eyes, feeling the weight of unintended consequences crushing down on her. Ashley, I'm so sorry. Is there anything I can do? Could you come? I know things are complicated between you and Jake, but family should be together right now. The word family hit Sarah like a physical blow. She looked at Sterling, who had clearly heard enough of the conversation to understand what was happening. Go, he said quietly. Some things are more important than business. Sarah stood, her legs unsteady. The acquisition will wait. Your family needs you right now. At the hospital, Sarah found Jake pacing the waiting room like a caged animal, his hair disheveled and his eyes red with exhaustion and fear. When he saw her, something complex passed between them. Surprise, gratitude, and the ghost of affection they'd shared as children. How is she? Sarah asked. They don't know yet. Emergency surgery to try to save the baby. Jake's voice cracked. The doctor said stress could have been a contributing factor. The accusation hung unspoken between them, but Sarah heard it anyway. Her revenge had put her unborn niece or nephew at risk. The victory she'd spent 5 years planning might cost an innocent life. Jake, don't. Jake held up a hand, his voice exhausted rather than angry. Whatever you were going to say, just don't. Not now. They sat in silence, two siblings who'd forgotten how to comfort each other, waiting to learn whether Sarah's thirst for revenge had claimed its most innocent victim. As the hours stretched on, Sarah began to understand what Sterling had tried to tell her. That some victories cost more than defeat, and some wounds were too deep to heal with more wounding. The question was whether she'd learned this lesson, too late to matter. The call came at 4:17 a.m. while Sarah sat in the hospital waiting room, her designer blazer wrinkled from hours of restless movement, her carefully styled hair falling in limp strands around her face. Jake had fallen asleep. In the uncomfortable plastic chair across from her, his head tilted back against the wall, exhaustion finally overwhelming his vigil. They hadn't spoken in 3 hours. Ms. Mitchell. The voice belonged to David Chen, her lead attorney. I know it's early, but Sterling's legal team just filed the papers. The company is officially for sale again, but with new conditions. Sarah stepped into the hallway, careful not to wake Jake. What kind of conditions? Sterling wants to expedite the sale. 72 hours instead of the usual 90-day process. He's also demanding a retention agreement for all current employees and a commitment that you won't terminate anyone for 12 months. David's voice carried confusion. It's like he wants to get this over with as quickly as possible. Sarah felt a hollow victory settling in her chest. After 5 years of planning, countless sacrifices, and the systematic destruction of every meaningful relationship in her life, Robert Sterling was finally surrendering. She should have felt triumphant. Instead, she felt nothing but exhaustion. Accept the terms, she said quietly. All of them? Even the employment protection clauses? All of them. As she hung up, Sarah realized that Jake had awakened and was watching her from the doorway. His face was haggard, but his eyes held a clarity that suggested he'd heard enough to understand what had just happened. You won, he said simply. Yeah, I won. They stood in the sterile hospital corridor, siblings who'd become strangers, each processing the magnitude of what Sarah's victory actually meant. Jake's career was over. His reputation was destroyed. The company he'd devoted 3 years of, his life to building, was now owned by the sister he'd publicly humiliated. Are you going to fire everyone who worked with me? Jake asked. No. Sterling negotiated protection for all current employees. Including Tyler? Sarah's throat tightened. Including Tyler. Jake nodded slowly, then surprised her by asking, Did you love him? Tyler? The question hit Sarah harder than any accusation could have. She thought about Tyler's laugh, the way he'd talked about his childhood in Tennessee, how he'd looked at her like she was something precious instead of something broken, how she'd destroyed all of that for a revenge that now felt meaningless. I think I did, she whispered. I think I loved him more than I've ever loved anything, and I destroyed it anyway. Why? It was such a simple question, but Sarah found herself struggling to answer. Why had she been willing to sacrifice love for revenge? Why had proving Jake wrong mattered more than building something real with Tyler? Because you made me believe I wasn't worth loving unless I could prove my value first, she said finally. Because I needed to be successful enough that no one could ever dismiss me again. Before Jake could respond, Dr. Martinez appeared at the end of the hallway, still wearing surgical scrubs, her expression carefully neutral. Both siblings turned toward her with the desperate hope of people who'd spent hours fearing the worst. The surgery was successful, Dr. Martinez said, and Sarah felt her knees nearly buckle with relief. We were able to stabilize the placenta and stop the bleeding. Both mother and baby are stable. Jake's face crumpled with gratitude and exhaustion. Can we see her? She's in recovery now. You can see her briefly, but she needs rest. As they walked toward Ashley's room, Jake stopped and looked at his sister. Sarah, what you did to my career. I probably deserved it. But Ashley and the baby didn't deserve to be caught in the crossfire. I know, Sarah said, the weight of guilt crushing down on her. I know, and I'm sorry. Ashley looked small and fragile in the hospital bed, connected to monitors that beeped reassuringly. When she saw Sarah, her eyes filled with tears. Thank you for coming, she whispered. I know things are complicated, but… Family shows up, Sarah said, taking Ashley's hand. Even when everything else is broken, family shows up. 3 hours later, Sarah stood in her new office at Sterling Consulting Group. The building felt different now that she owned it. Smaller somehow, less impressive than it had seemed when it represented an impossible goal. Robert Sterling had cleared out his personal items the night before, leaving behind only the infrastructure of a business built on principles Sarah wasn't sure she could maintain. Marcus found her there, standing at the window that overlooked downtown Dallas. She'd expected anger from him, or at least disappointment. Instead, he looked tired. Congratulations, he said without enthusiasm. You got what you wanted, did I? Sarah gestured around the empty office. I own a consulting firm I never wanted, in an industry I don't understand, filled with employees who know I destroyed their previous boss's career for personal reasons. You also destroyed the career of your brother, broke the heart of a man who loved you, and drove away everyone who cared about you. Marcus's voice was matter-of-fact rather than accusatory. But hey, you proved Jake wrong. Some victory. Sarah turned from the window to face him. Are you here to resign officially? I'm here to offer you a choice, Marcus said. You can run Sterling the way you've been running Mitchell Financial, as a weapon in your personal war. Or you can try to build something better. What's the difference? I've already won. Have you? Marcus moved to stand beside her at the window. Jake's career is over, but he's still married to a woman who loves him. Ashley's pregnancy is stable, and they're talking about starting fresh somewhere new. Meanwhile, you're standing alone in an office you bought with blood money, having driven away every person who ever mattered to you. The words stung because they were true. Sarah had achieved everything she'd planned: professional success, financial security, revenge against the brother who'd humiliated her. But standing in this empty office, she felt more hollow than she had 5 years ago in that hospital parking lot. Tyler won't even take my calls, she said quietly. Would you, if you were him? Sarah's phone buzzed with a text from her mother. Ashley and the baby are doing well. Jake's taking a job in Austin. They want a fresh start. Thank you for being there last night. It meant more than you know. A job in Austin. Sarah realized that her victory was complete. She'd driven Jake out of Dallas entirely, destroyed his reputation so thoroughly that he'd had to leave the city to find work. She should have felt satisfied. Instead, she felt like she'd lost something irreplaceable. I don't know how to be anything other than angry, she admitted to Marcus. For 5 years, revenge was the only thing that motivated me. It's what built this company, what drove every decision I made. Without it, I don't know who I am. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, looking out at the city where they'd both built their careers. Maybe that's the point, he said finally. Maybe you need to figure out who Sarah Mitchell is when she's not defined by what Jake Mitchell did to her. And if there's nothing left, then you build something new, something better. Marcus headed toward the door, then paused. For what it's worth, The Sarah I met 5 years ago. The one who helped me start a nonprofit to support veterans, who wrote software for free because she believed in the cause. She was worth knowing. Maybe it's time to find her again. After Marcus left, Sarah stood alone in her newly acquired empire, surrounded by the monuments to a victory that tasted like ashes. She thought about Tyler, probably packing his office somewhere in the building below. She thought about Jake and Ashley, planning their escape to Austin. She thought about her parents, finally forced to confront the family dysfunction they'd spent decades avoiding. She'd gotten everything she'd wanted, and lost everything that mattered. The question now was whether she had enough humanity left to build something meaningful from the ruins of her revenge, or whether she'd become so consumed by anger that redemption was beyond her reach. The Dallas skyline stretched endlessly beyond her window, full of possibilities she no longer knew how to see. Sarah Mitchell, CEO of 2 companies and destroyer of lives, had finally learned the true price of victory. The question was whether she was willing to pay the even higher cost of change. 3 months after acquiring Sterling Consulting Group, Sarah Mitchell stood in the conference room she'd redesigned to erase every trace of Robert Sterling's leadership. The mahogany table had been replaced with sleek glass, the traditional artwork swapped for modern abstracts, the leather chairs updated to ergonomic mesh. Everything about the space proclaimed new ownership, new direction, new purpose. But the faces around the table told a different story. Tyler Brooks sat at the far end, his expression professionally neutral, but his eyes avoiding hers. The other senior consultants maintained careful distance, their loyalty clearly lying with the legacy Robert Sterling had built, rather than the woman who'd dismantled it. Sarah had won the war, but inherited a workforce that viewed her as an occupying force. The Q4 projections look strong, reported Jennifer Walsh, the operations director who'd worked for Sterling for 8 years. Client retention is at 87%, which is acceptable under the circumstances. The phrase "under the circumstances" hung in the air like an accusation. Everyone in the room knew the circumstances, that their new CEO had systematically targeted their former employer, manipulated one of their colleagues, and acquired the company as part of a personal vendetta. Acceptable isn't good enough, Sarah said, her voice carrying the authority she'd cultivated over 5 years of building Mitchell Financial. We need to be exceptional. Our clients need to know that Sterling Consulting Group is stronger under new leadership. Tyler finally spoke, his voice carefully professional. With respect, Ms. Mitchell, most of our clients are aware of how you acquired this company. Trust is going to be an ongoing challenge. The formal address hit Sarah harder than any insult could have. For 8 months he'd called her Sarah, had whispered her name in the dark, had made it sound like something precious. Now she was Ms. Mitchell, reduced to a title and surname. Their entire relationship erased by corporate politeness. Then we'll have to earn that trust back, Sarah replied, meeting his gaze for the first time in months. Starting with how we conduct ourselves going forward. After the meeting, Sarah retreated to her office and found Marcus waiting for her. He'd been stopping by regularly since their conversation 3 months ago, not quite ready to return but not willing to abandon her entirely. Today, he held a manila folder that made Sarah's stomach clench with recognition. "Therapy recommendations," he said without preamble. "You said you didn't know who you were without the anger. Maybe it's time to find out." Sarah took the folder but didn't open it. "I'm fine, Marcus. I don't need—" "You stood in a hospital waiting room 3 months ago, watching your brother fall apart because your actions put his wife and child at risk, and you still went through with the acquisition." Marcus's voice was gentle but uncompromising. "That's not fine, Sarah. That's someone who's forgotten how to choose anything but revenge." Before Sarah could argue, her assistant knocked and announced a visitor who made her blood run cold. Jake Mitchell stood in her office doorway, looking older than his 31 years, but somehow more centered than she'd seen him since high school. Austin had been good to him. His clothes were simpler, his posture less aggressive, his eyes clearer. "Hello, Sarah." Marcus excused himself, leaving the siblings alone for the first time since the hospital. Jake moved to the window, looking out at the Dallas skyline he'd once planned to conquer. "Nice office," he said. "Sterling always did have good taste." "What are you doing here, Jake?" "Ashley had the baby. A girl. Emma Rose Mitchell." Jake's voice carried wonder and exhaustion in equal measure. She's perfect. 8 pounds, 2 ounces, and she has Ashley's eyes. Sarah felt something shift in her chest, an emotion she couldn't quite name. Congratulations. How's Ashley? Good. Tired, but good. The doctors say there shouldn't be any lasting complications from the pregnancy. Jake turned to face her. She asked me to thank you. For what? For showing up at the hospital. For putting family ahead of whatever else was happening between us. Jake moved closer to her desk. And for this. He pulled out an envelope bearing the Sterling Consulting Group letterhead. Sarah recognized it immediately. The severance package she'd quietly arranged for Jake, officially listed as Consultant Transition Assistance, to avoid any appearance of family favoritism. You didn't have to do that, Jake said. After everything, I did. Everything I said. You could have left me with nothing. Sarah stared at the envelope, remembering the sleepless night she'd spent crafting the severance package. She'd told herself it was just good business, a way to avoid potential legal complications, but sitting here now, she knew it had been something else, the first crack in the armor of hate she'd built around her heart. I wanted you to have a fresh start, she said quietly, away from all this. Why? It was the same question he'd asked in the hospital, and Sarah still struggled with the answer. Because Emma deserves to have a father who isn't broken by my need for revenge. Because Ashley deserves a husband who can move forward instead of backward. Because maybe I'm tired of being the villain in our family story. Jake sat down across from her, the same chair Tyler had occupied during countless evenings when Sarah had mined him for information. The irony wasn't lost on either of them. I've been thinking about that night at my graduation, Jake said. About what I said, why I said it. Jake, you don't have to. Yeah, I do. His voice was firm, but not angry. I was scared. Scared that maybe you were actually braver than me, stronger than me, willing to take risks I never would. When your first business failed, I should have been supportive. Instead, I was relieved. It meant I was still the successful one, still the golden child. Sarah felt tears threatening for the first time in months. You were scared of me? Terrified. You were building something from nothing while I was following a predetermined path. You were creating while I was just performing. Jake leaned forward. That night, drunk on champagne and my own sense of superiority, I tried to destroy you before you could prove me wrong. You did destroy me. For a while. No, I didn't. You built 2 companies, Sarah. You became everything you said you would. Be and more. I didn't destroy you. I just gave you fuel to become unstoppable. They sat in silence, 2 siblings finally seeing each other clearly for the first time in decades. Sarah thought about the therapy folder Marcus had left, about Tyler's careful distance, about the employees who worked for her but didn't trust her. I don't know how to stop being angry, she admitted. I don't know how to be successful without it being about proving someone wrong. Maybe start small, Jake suggested. Maybe start with being successful at being human again. After Jake left, promising to send pictures of Emma and inviting Sarah to visit Austin when she was ready, Sarah sat alone with Marcus's folder. The first therapist on the list specialized in family trauma and workplace dysfunction. The second focused on helping high achievers find meaning beyond success. The third worked with people recovering from obsessive behaviors. Sarah picked up her phone and dialed the first number. 6 months later, Sarah stood in the same conference room, but the dynamic had shifted. Tyler still maintained professional distance, but his hostility had softened into something approaching respect. The team had slowly begun to trust her leadership, as she'd focused on building rather than destroying, on supporting employee growth rather than manipulating it. The Hartwell Industries contract is signed, Tyler reported, his tone neutral but no longer cold. They specifically requested our team because of our reputation for ethical practices. Sarah nodded, accepting the compliment without the desperate need for validation that had once driven every interaction. Therapy had been harder than building either of her companies, requiring her to examine wounds she'd preferred to weaponize. But slowly, painfully, She was learning to be Sarah Mitchell without defining herself by what Jake Mitchell had done to her. "There's something else," Tyler said as the meeting concluded. "I've been offered a position with a firm in Seattle. Better opportunity, chance to start fresh." Sarah felt the familiar urge to manipulate, to find a way to make him stay, to control the outcome. Instead, she heard herself saying, "Congratulations, you deserve every success." Tyler's surprise was evident. "Thank you. That means a lot." After everyone left, Sarah opened the bottom drawer of her desk and pulled out a photo Jake had sent from Austin. Emma Rose Mitchell sleeping in her father's arms, both of them peaceful in a way that spoke to healing rather than victory. Beside it was a business card from a nonprofit that supported first-generation college students, an organization Tyler had mentioned during one of their early dinners. Sarah picked up her phone and dialed the nonprofit's number. It was time to start building something that mattered, something that honored the woman Marcus had believed she could become rather than the weapon she'd made herself into. The Dallas skyline stretched beyond her window, full of possibilities she was finally ready to explore. Sarah Mitchell, CEO and recovering revenge addict, was learning that the hardest victory of all was the one you won over yourself. And for the first time in 5 years, she was looking forward instead of backward, building instead of destroying, choosing love over the comfortable familiarity of hate. The cycle was finally broken. The real work of healing could begin. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.